Hello, Detroit and the world. Welcome to another episode of Authentically Detroit, broadcasting live from the Lower East Side here in the city, powered by the East Side Community Network and sponsored by none other than the Ford Foundation. Now, a new content partner to bridgedetroit.com. I'm Orlando Bailey.
I'm Donna Givens Jameson. I'm sorry.
We're gonna get that right.
I was reading the run of show, and I'm sorry.
Donna got a new name, and so she still forgets how to introduce herself.
I don't even know who I am anymore. Okay, let's get
Thank you for listening in and supporting our efforts to build a platform of authentic voices for real people on the East Side of Detroit. We want you to like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you listen to us on. We drop a new episode every week, so be sure to turn on those notifications. Today, we're happy to welcome Graig Donnelly, Bianca Garcia, and Frank Joyce. The three of them recently co-authored an op-ed in Bridge Detroit advocating for Grosse Pointe to tear down the walls at the border. Graig, Bianca, and Frank, welcome to Authentically Detroit.
Yes,
Glad to be here.
Yay, thanks for having us.
We're happy to have you. Certainly a lot going on in the world with about 14 days up into the election. So my question is the same as always. How are you, Donna, and how was your weekend?
My weekend was good. It was Sweetest Day, so I enjoyed it. It was the first time we've gone out in a long time, got dressed up, had a good time, and we went to a new restaurant.
Facebook, y'all was sharp.
And so, we decided to do something different. And that is to give each other a gift every month and to go out once a month and just celebrate, have a date night. And so it may be our last date night out in a while, depending on how this pandemic is going, because it's getting a little scarier, but it was good. It was really good. Other than that, we visited family and, just relaxed. How was yours?
It was good. So I think Sweetest Day is like a Midwestern thing. Some of my friends in like New York and Cali have no idea what it was, but in Detroit, it's a thing. My Sweetest Day was like an epic fail, but we can talk about that later. But the bright spot over the weekend was the season finale of Lovecraft Country. I think since Lovecraft Country has been on the air, I have talked about it on this podcast every single week because it is just that good, y'all. And I actually think, Donna, you tell me what you think. I don't think they should come back for season 2. I think they should leave it alone. I think they put a nice button on it. It was great. If you haven't watched it, watch it on HBO. But I think it's done. What do you think?
I don't know. I watched how many seasons of Game of Thrones. I could see some character development there. I could see what happens with the sister. She's hooked up to a machine, and I don't remember people's names. And
Ruby, her name is Ruby.
Ruby, and who's the main character? The man, what's his name? Tick. I can see somehow them moving into something different. I was really excited about the movement of mother and daughter into becoming super women and discovering their powers and really discovering their greatness.
Yeah.
And so I would be happy to see those characters fleshed out. Our story certainly did not end then, and our magic needs to be. And now that we have the magic, let's use it. I mean, I don't just want to have it. I want the characters to be able to use the magic now that they have it. So honestly, I would love to have a season 2 after umpteen seasons of watching dragons and
I know Game of Thrones. I
was a fan, but I'm a fan of Black folks who are magic and discovering their powers as well.
Love it. Hey, Frank, Graig, and Bianca, how was y'all weekend? Anything fun?
Well, I'll start. Mine was mind-blowing because completely unexpectedly, this all came together at the 11th hour. My son and his wife and daughter, our granddaughter, zapped into Detroit on Friday night to see Sophia. She's the granddaughter's grandmother, Marcia, music in the opera.
Oh yeah.
And they all went to the drive-in opera. I couldn't go because I had to be on a webinar, but I had one of my kids, my granddaughter, in town for the weekend. I could not have asked for anything more.
Yeah, I saw pictures of that. It looked really cool. What about you, Bianca? How was your weekend?
Yeah, so I actually I saw that opera on Thursday and it was really, really
Oh,
cool.
wow.
It was really cool to see something like that happening. Yeah, it was awesome. They did a great job with the staging. They had a great cast. Everyone was so talented. The story was a little hard to follow. But it was also really cool that it was social distance in a parking garage and they were able to bring some actual vehicles into the staging. So it was like a very Detroit version of this opera. Not maybe purposely, maybe not, but like having the cars incorporated in it was really cool. So yeah, that was cool. I did that on Thursday, but then the rest of this weekend I went to a corn maze and then I watched a few horror movies and it was the first time that I watched Us and it was an amazing movie. It was so I just waited so long to watch it. And I'm so glad that I finally watched it because it was great. It was so good and I'm like still thinking about it and still trying to figure out like
Oh, I think we
what
lost.
I got from it. And it's an amazing movie to think about. I really, really enjoyed it.
Cool, cool. I like Us too. How about you, Greg? Good weekend?
Well, it was a great weekend. Thanks for not ruining anything with Lovecraft Country for me. We're waiting to watch it all like in one day. I haven't watched shows that way because I don't want to wait a week for what's next, so we're holding out. But my wife and I, we barbecued, did some work outside at the house. We've been spending a lot of quality time in our yard this year, and I think our one of our favorite routines is going to the drive-through at Eastern Market every Saturday morning and picking up our food box, and then we take one to my wife's mom, and just we kind of set ourselves up for the weekend by doing that. But I think a high point for me was actually watching. I was talking with Frank and Bianca about this yesterday. The Chicago 7 movie that Netflix put out, and that was really great. Just it grounded me in kind of this moment in our history, and I feel like we've been here before in a way.
I have to check that out. I haven't seen that yet. Wow. Well, sounds like everybody had, a great time. We need a little respite. We need that break over the weekend. And so we're back in the swing of things, and news certainly has not slowed. So it's time for fresh off the press news that we are thinking about. If you have pieces that you want discussed on Authentically Detroit, you can hit us up on our socials at Authentically Detroit at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or you can email us at authenticallydetroit at gmail.com. Donna, fresh off the press.
All right, hold on for 1 second. Duggan administration's unanswered questions mandate no vote on Proposal B. This is the Detroit Free Press editorial board. So I think there was the Detroit Free Press has helped to through investigative reporting unveil a lot of stories about things that have gone wrong with the administration, the current Duggan administration over the years, the secrecy, the make a date scandal, aspects of some of what's going on with the demolition contracts. And most recently, Detroit's own Kat Stafford came back from AP to release a story on lead poisoning as relates to housing demolition and the fact that the city should have stopped housing demolitions in neighborhoods that are really heavily impacted by lead poisoning between May and August, and unless they were emergency demolitions, said they were and didn't. And so it's pretty upsetting information. The explanation was, well, we were really prepared and it takes a long time to get prepared, so we couldn't stop. And I think probably a lot of people who are reading this, or maybe it's just me, think that somebody was promised the money and they wanted to get paid, and so we didn't stop. And like so many things, it's unclear how decisions are made, whether decisions are being made on behalf of citizens and residents and what's in our best interest, or whether citizens are being made on behalf of campaign contributors, friends, and business people who are just true customers of city government, if in fact that's the case. And your story may actually help us figure that one out, Orlando. But how are decisions being made? And so now Detroiters are being asked to raise additional bond funds. And if the decision tree says what is in the best interest of business and what is in the best interest of these contractors, whether they are Black or white or higher Detroiters or non-Detroiters, the question is, should we approve this money, $250 million? Should Detroiters approve this money? And there's also questions that were raised in this article about the $600 million in overtaxation and who should benefit. The Free Press editorial board notes, and I do as well, that there is a tremendous need for demolition of homes in some neighborhoods that have not been supported through the hardest hit funds. We have residents who we care about who are living in entrenched blight that goes back decades, and it is not fair that anybody should have to live among that. And so the administration has said, well, federal rules stopped us from spending money here. And that's interesting because it seems to me as though the hardest hit funds had restrictions that Dan Gilbert, I understand, went to DC and helped negotiate changes to. And so why did we negotiate changes that left out some neighborhoods in Detroit if we were going to negotiate changes at all? And you know, there's a lack of transparency, and there's a lack of trust about governmental decision making. And so the Detroit Free Press landed at no, that it was a difficult decision. The need is great. They support all of the objectives as stated, but they don't necessarily trust that, number one, the dollars will be used as projected on Detroit business owners, that Detroiters will be higher because there are not protections in there that they want to see. And then the third thing is that the city has the capacity, right, as it stands, to address some of the health consequences of demolitions. I think that's a summary. And that's kind of where I stand. No, actually, I'm not taking a position. I'm standing with the fact that I think every citizen in Detroit who votes should take a position. And they've got to weigh out what makes best sense for them. Because who am I to say that the priority of removing housing in heavily blighted areas should not be the priority of the city? I think the vote is the best way for us to figure out how to prioritize use of funds. And it'll be interesting to see how this turns out with citizens. What are your thoughts?
Well, the only thing that I'll say,
Yeah, so
I'm sorry, go ahead, Bianca.
oh, okay, thank you. I will say, me now as a Detroiter, and also growing up, spending a lot of time at my Wella's house in Southwest Detroit, you know, not all Detroiters see blight the same way. For us, the blight in her neighborhood was really dangerous. A lot of them turned into drug houses or had, you know, criminal activity going on in them. Kids would go into abandoned houses and get hurt playing around in them. And so when I saw a proposal, and I was all for it, and I didn't just like look at it and say, yeah, I read what the city put out. I read a couple articles. I watched the press conference, and I was all gung-ho and for it, because it was a plan to replace originally what Duggan had put in for the city council, which was only demolitions, and even less defined with who the contractors would be, where the money was coming from, and all that. So voting on, and now I'm very torn because I read the article about the lead poisoning, but you know, as far as the vote goes, if what we're voting for is the 8,000 demolitions and the 8,000 rehabs, the thing that's hard and really abstract that we don't really realize that we're voting for is, are they going to be taking care of materials properly, like the lead poisoning? You know, are they going to be doing things ethically? How are they really going to be using the money? Are things going to funnel into not actually happening anymore? But there's a lot of neighborhoods that have an immediate need for blight to be removed, whether it be raising them through demolition and then giving the neighbor next to the lot priority on buying the lot really cheap and annexing that into their property, or renovating, you know, houses that have enough stable structure for people to move into, especially as we go into this weird economic time with the coronavirus. You know, housing is becoming scarce, especially with affordable housing. So, you know, would the city make that affordable? And that's where there's some unanswered questions. So me as a Detroiter, I'm having some issues on how I'm going to vote because I have all this past with blight messing stuff up and ruining neighborhoods and people getting hurt and all that. But then the same things could happen through this proposal. And it's really hard to trust the Duggan administration. So I'm very in the middle right now.
If I could just really interject real quickly, that there's no money allocated to renovations or rehabbing homes. There's money protective to mothball homes. And mothballing is very different from renovation. Mothballing means that we're going to clean it out, we're going to put a roof on, and we're going to put some boarding up or some type of clear cut, or I forget what they call it, to cover up the windows. And so it will be an improvement over an open home, but it will not be rehab. And there are many questions about what is the rehab going to look like. There are many people who are saying that those people whose taxes were overassessed should be first in line to receive these rehabbed homes. And there are also questions about the cost of the rehab and also the sale. Should you sell them? Can you rent them? Can you create a community land trust and sell them some other kind of way by contract as opposed to going through a bank? Those are some unanswered questions that some of us have been trying to push the city to put some detail beforehand. And I'm going to say the city council had the opportunity to demand answers to all of these questions in July. And instead of demanding the city come back to the table with answers to these questions, they decided to just rush this thing to a vote, saying, hey, wait, and we waited too long. We waited on the blight bond, that should have passed. Now we're unwilling to have further conversations or hearing or anything else. And I think that if this doesn't pass, it's largely because city council did not do the job of mandating that these questions get answered so that we would have, as a voting community, confidence in all of these matters.
I wonder how significant the Free Press's urging of voting no on proposal in could be, and how influential this article would be amongst Detroit voters. I think a lot of people are where you are, Bianca, but I also think a lot of people are, really far to the left on this one, at least in the spheres that I have access to. There are a lot of people who are saying no to this. Environmental concerns, but transparency around the processes that should and would be implemented if this passes. And one of the questions that we asked Arthur Jemison on this show that still isn't and has not been answered is the fact of the matter is there are more than 16,000 structures that need to be secured and or demolished, number one. And then number two, these structures are all over the city. Where do you start? And how do you choose where to start? And how do you choose to the neighborhoods that will get the benefit of having these blighted homes demolished? And that question still isn't answered. And I think the Free Press highlighted that absent concrete plans to supplement this proposal, Detroiters really don't have an idea of what they're voting for if they say yes to this. And I think that is, I think it's a solid critique. And we've asked the same questions and still don't have that answer. So any other comment? Go ahead.
I haven't voted in Detroit since 2008 when I moved to New York, and then, moved back and moved to Grosse Pointe Park in 2013. So I want to give a huge caveat that I don't vote in Detroit. But it seems to me that we need a vision for what we're trying to get to, and eliminating blight is sort of a base need. Maybe it's not a vision in my mind. What can we do with all of this space that we have and all these opportunities with structures that might otherwise just be lost? Where's that vision?
I want to read a quote to that point.
Question.
Amen.
Your board wrote in regards to vision. I'll read this quote. It says, likewise, delinquent is a transparent planning structure. The city still doesn't have a master plan to guide development. Arthur Jemison says the city has agreed to complete neighborhood plans for every part of the city in the next 5 years, comprising a de facto master plan. But until those plans are in place, residents lack vital information about how the city intends to use newly cleared land in their neighborhood. So
Yeah.
to that, what you're talking about around vision, what is the vision? What is the base that we're working off of? And I think the article is highlighting that we don't have that base yet.
And I think a master plan is one thing. I think a housing plan is another thing. It's part of a master plan, but you don't necessarily have to have a housing plan that really looks at how do we house everybody who needs housing in our community. Housing is a human right, and it is also a human necessity. You can't tell people to shelter in place if they don't have a place to shelter. And I think that, you know, every child deserves to grow up in a home. Every senior deserves to live in a home. Every mother and father deserves to be able to raise their children in safe dwellings. And if we take that seriously, then the object of government is to figure out how do we make that happen. We certainly don't have resources to make it happen right now, but without a vision, people perish, literally. And so I agree with that. You know, even with the $50 million that the city has gotten a commitment for to invest in affordable housing, 50 million out of what large number is this? Do we need $50 million? If we have $50 million, is that going to fix housing in the city? It's going to take $250 million to demolish, and we're raising $50 million to invest in affordable housing. That seems to be a little bit off to me. It's not going to take 50 million. In fact, we had a conversation with the mayor. We talked about just investing in housing, home repair, because we don't talk about home repair, but a big issue around affordability is, can I afford to live in my home? Can I afford the roof that my home needs? Can I afford the porch? Can I afford electrical? Can I afford all of those things that my house needs in order to make it livable? And so in that, you know, conversation, the question becomes, how can you invest in home repair? So a lot of us were advocating for home repair. And I think we were told it would cost, in order to invest in everybody's home, maybe $500 million, $500 million. Okay, we've invested $500 million in demolition, more than that. And we're talking about investing even more. So that doesn't sound like a bad deal to me. And then we were told, and I quote, that is not the role of government. So I'm going to pause and hand off to Orlando so we can find out what the role is of government in his story.
No pressure. What's the role of government?
Detroit City Council approved sale of former state fairgrounds site for Amazon development. It was a 62 vote to okay property sale to Sterling Group of Detroit, Michigan, and the Dallas, Texas-based Hillwood Enterprises. And Amazon is expected to be a tenant and build a $400 million facility that would be the largest in our region. And that acreage is about 78 acres, of which Amazon would take over, but the entire site is about 142 acres. And so there is a lot of conversations about supplemental development in that area, what's going to happen with the rest of the land. We know that there is a promise to redo the transit center at the state fairgrounds. There is criticisms, of course, for what was traditionally public accessible land going to a private owner. The Sterling Group and Hillwood Enterprises are not using any tax subsidies by the city of Detroit. So that means that they do not have to enter into a community benefits agreement, even though they are saying that for construction, they are committing to hiring at least 51% of Detroiters. Amazon has not come out to say if there will be a commitment to hire X amount of Detroiters. And so this is just, you know, another big piece of news. And so this does have land use master plan implications, of course, for light industrial. Over in that area. The city council members who voted yes were Leland, Spivey, Benson, McAllister, and Tate. City council members, and Ayers, city council members who voted no were Raquel Castaneda Lopez and Council President Brenda Jones. Council President Pro Tem Mary Sheffield was absent from that vote. And what the city has pitched to the neighborhood over there is to create some state fairgrounds community assistance and improvement plan, and they will help mitigate project impacts to the community that was raised by the public during the community engagement process. And they are promising to help local project curators and residents get grant funds and access to preservation resources and things of that sort. So yeah, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib wrote to the city administration voicing concerns of residents. So here is another big, just big deal. The site went for $9 million to these two groups. For transparency's sake, I want to make note that the Sterling Group, based in the city of Detroit, was founded by Gary Torgo, the chairman of TCF Bank, and is still run by the Torgo family here in the city of Detroit. So there we have it. Crane, that was Annalise Frank reporting from Cranes Detroit. They have renderings and everything for this, y'all. So this is big news, and we're hearing a lot on both sides of this. Donna, what's your take?
So number one, I'm just wondering what the appraised value is for this land. It looks to me as though they sold it for $63,000 per acre. Is that market within the market condition, within the appraised value? Because the other question is, did they sell this at a discounted rate? And the other question is, will there be any state of Michigan Economic Development Corporation tax incentives? If so, that would mean that there were tax incentives, but you can bypass the community development process by having that. The other question I have is whether or not there is a TIF in the area. So I'm just interested in understanding the entire economic makeup. I know that there is a TIF for the shopping center right there. And if there's a TIF, then you can't really layer a tax incentive on top of a TIF. So is this one of these things where I move into a TIF area? And with the tax increment finance, tax increment financing is a mechanism where taxes that are generated over and above the current property tax value are captured and used by an entity. So I would be very interested in understanding the tax structure of this deal. And I don't think the saying there's not going to be no new tax abatement doesn't really, complete my understanding. That said, I believe that the price and the location is probably optimal. I'd love to see how that compares to what was offered to some of the other people who are looking at developing that space. This group is going to be purchasing the entire 142 acres. Amazon will be in 78 of those 142 acres. So this is all now going to be controlled by Gary Torgo. And for those who are his family organization, the Sterling Group, and if you don't know, he is the president and CEO of Chemical Bank, or TCF Bank, which is also who owns, got the naming right for Coble Center. So you're talking about powerful people and government really advancing the economic interest of powerful people and using the prospect of jobs. Now, I think it's 1,200 jobs to justify this economic interest. So since poor people can't generate jobs, we can't spend our money helping them. But since rich people can create jobs, we should invest in their or support their developments. And, Republicans have language where they talk about makers and takers and all of this kind of stuff. Workers were takers until COVID-19, then they became essential workers, and we understood we couldn't live without them. But up until then, a whole lot of people just called us takers, right? And so makers and takers, and so we want to help the makers. And Ronald Reagan had language for that. He talked about trickle down, right? And wealth would trickle down. If you just build it up, wealth would trickle down. And we've seen nothing but wealth trickle up for the past 40 years since Reagan first did that. So I'm concerned about what all of
things that the city is going to help establish a state fairgrounds community assistance and improvement plan. And they're going to help nearby communities apply for grants and other funding. They're going to consider security, health, and pollution in the future fairgrounds development, assisting with traffic management and targeting the nearby neighborhoods for city redevelopment projects and programs.
And what those city redevelopment projects and programs look like is another question. Since there is no master plan, we don't know if we're talking about gentrification and affordability that people in Detroit can't afford. I think there are some real serious questions that we have to ask. And again, this is the kind of thing where you have this project and that project, and every time some rich person comes in and wants to do something, we have a ticker tape parade. But the reality is that we really have to look at what has happened over the past 10 years. All of these projects that are supposed to lift us all. I think there's a book called Divided City where it's noted that Black Detroiters have become more poor, more socially isolated. Their housing values have not increased. Our housing values have not increased. Who am I talking about but me? Our housing values have not increased. And even Black middle class people tend to live in areas that are more poor than they were before the recession. And white people tend to live in places where you see housing values and cost of living appreciating. So we have a documented track record of racial injustice in real estate markets and banking and financial institutions and corporations. It's documented. It's not something I need to talk about here because we talk about it all of the time. We can just call it American apartheid and say that our government has created apartheid conditions in our community. And when you come forward and you have these things and you call it, well, we're going to fix things with colorblind policies. You weren't colorblind. The FHA was not colorblind. Lenders doing, predatory lending weren't colorblind. And our public policy right now is not colorblind. When you look at who got their homes taken by the tax man in Wayne County, it was not a colorblind process. The vast majority of people who lost their homes were Black. And people can say, well, they didn't know that was going to happen. But I promise you this before we move on. If the vast majority of people who lost their homes were white, this policy would have been stopped in its tracks years ago. The fact that it's allowed to continue and we keep tinkering around the edges rather than saying, let's just reverse this. Imagine in Grosse Pointe, we're about to talk about Grosse Pointe, and we got a Grosse Pointer here. So Graig, the focus is on you. Imagine in Grosse Pointe, Grosse Pointers finding out that their government had overtaxed them by $600,000 in the past 10 years.
Yeah.
What would be happening there?
A Detroiter in exile in Grosse Pointe instead?
Pardon me?
A Detroiter in exile in Grosse Pointe.
But I'm just saying, your neighbors, the people in Grosse Pointe. I have friends and family there. Imagine the outcry. Imagine what the Grosse Pointe News would be saying if the government took $600 million in overtaxation under prior administrations and then came back and said, my bad, it wasn't me. What's that song? It wasn't me.
Can I just jump in here with a quick point, and not to cut off Graig, but it's so fascinating, the theme that is running through this whole conversation now, and I think will continue. Let's not zoom out 10 years or 50 years. Let's zoom out 400 years or 500 years and look at a system that was created to benefit white male property owners. Mm-hmm. And so from colonialism in the 1400s to the state fairgrounds, we are reproducing generation after generation after generation of the same basic system.
That's right.
And let's not forget that.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, we have to look at, and that's when I talk about American apartheid. That's exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
not something that occurred. It was a systemic, and it was foundational in the
And
Constitution,
deliberate.
and in Supreme Court decisions, in laws and policies that have never ended. And even though our laws and policies have moved into the realm of supposedly colorblind, they are structured and enforced in such a way that we keep on reproducing the same injustice that existed at our foundation. Maybe it's different now because you do have middle class Black people and you do have actually wealthy Black people, but the
Rich
reality
Black
is
people.
the system of injustice still exists, and way too many Black people are trapped in unjust situations now. And a lot of that injustice is profitable for people who are white, and it remains profitable. When you
All
look
of it.
at the injustice of the tax foreclosures, when you look at the injustice of predatory lending, those things have been profitable to Wayne County, which has balanced its budget on, addressing tax collection activities, whether it is the what do you call it, the payment agreements or sales at auction. Wayne County has balanced its budget on the backs of tax crisis of Black Detroiters.
Yep. And it's
If
extremely
you look
profitable
at
to all the white guys that show up to the auction and buy block after block after block of property for next to nothing compared to what the families who lived there for years invested in it.
it was profitable to unregulated lenders and people who sold reverse mortgages and predatory loans to Black people. And it is profitable right now to demolition contractors who are becoming enriched. Over $500 million in the Duggan administration invested in demolishing those homes. Lots of people got paid a whole lot of money to clean up after a government that messed up. And so, you can't have race neutral policies to fix what was a racist system. I don't want to stay on this too long, but it's just one of these things where you just get so upset because if our government put the same amount of effort into building deals and creating deals to benefit the people who the government in Detroit harmed through action and inaction, imagine where we would be.
Yeah, and again, this has been a theme lately on this show where we discuss some of the votes and decisions made by city council that we just believe aren't always in the best interest of Detroiters. And once again, I am disillusioned and disappointed with this city council. To be frank, I think that we sometimes are so scared that the rich folks are going to go away and take their money and put it somewhere else, where we don't stand up for the people that elected you to represent them. Why is it? How can we sell 143 acres or whatever the acreage is to a company with a tenant that has committed to building on that site without that tenant guaranteeing jobs to Detroit residents? How is that permitted? How is that permitted? I don't understand.
When that tenant is Amazon, run by, what is the richest man in the world who doesn't pay taxes?
We don't pay taxes.
It's offensive. It is absolutely offensive. But if you looked at Detroit, not as a city, but as a colony, a place where people come to extract resources and to establish footholds where they can control all of the resources, be they people and land and water and whatever else you want to control, it would all make sense. That Detroit really is a colony that builds profit, and the people in Detroit are subjects and not citizens in the eyes of government. And so the government is not designed and not structured to advance the interest of everyday people, but to advance the interest of, this idea that you have these benevolent corporations, the benevolent corporate, occupiers of our space. And none of that gives any power to Detroiters. Coleman Young did so much in his administration to advance Black power, Black inclusion, shared benefit. And we have seen that whittled away since he stepped down out of office. And where we are right now, is, pretty troubling. So as we shift our conversation to talk about what's happening in one of our adjacent communities, it's very helpful to understand the context of Detroit 2020 is not Detroit back in the day when there was anybody really saying, protect our people on the government side.
That wraps up our Fresh Off the Press segment. If you have pieces that you want discussed on Authentically Detroit, you can hit us up on our socials at Authentically Detroit on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or you can email us at authenticallydetroit@gmail.com. Now on to our featured discussion with Graig, Bianca, and Frank. We want to talk about development at the Detroit and Grosse Pointe borders, the historic tension and racism that exists at that border between the two cities, new coalitions that are being built. A prime example of that being the Mack Avenue Improvement Plan in partnership with the Grosse Pointes, the City of Detroit, and Eastside Community Network. And Graig, we'll start with you. You are sort of taking the lead on, calling for the border walls to be taken down, and you've assembled this very small coalition with the three of you, Frank and Bianca. What was the impetus for all of this for you?
So I think earlier this year, it became really clear to me and inspired a lot actually by some actions that some of our neighbors here were taking, especially Bianca. She organized a protest earlier this year in the wake of the killing of George Floyd that brought together hundreds of Grosse Pointers and Detroiters to talk about and make very apparent in your face to the powers that be in the points that we still have a lot to deal with along this historic dividing line between the city and the suburbs. And so I was inspired by that. And I picked back up maybe a torch that many of us, Frank included, had been trying to carry a few years ago around the importance of questioning all of these locations where the city of Grosse Pointe Park over the last 50 years or so has literally put up walls at the Detroit border. Most recently with the closure of Kercheval in 2013 and 2014. I think in this moment in the history of the world, the time is now. Maybe the time was a long time ago. And I didn't want to miss the opportunity to raise the question. So I started asking the Grosse Pointe Park City Council 5 months ago to just put it on their agenda to talk about, to just have an open conversation about these barriers and why they're there and how we can think differently and better about those connection points with Detroit in the future. And it has yet to be something that the city council or mayor or administration has been willing to talk about openly.
Mm-hmm.
Bianca, can you talk to us a little bit about your organizing work and sort of why you have a stake in this particular fight as a Southwest Detroit resident?
Yeah, so most of my time growing up, I've been in Grosse Pointe Park. So I went through Grosse Pointe schools. And, at the time that I organized the protest, I just felt like this was something that was always on my mind all throughout high school, was these borders, because not only are there the physical borders that are up all around Grosse Pointe Park that are barricaded up against Detroit, but there are also just mental borders. When I was younger, my family spent a lot of time in the city. They met in the city. My dad was born and raised in the city. And at that time, 10, 15 years ago, I would come back from what I did over the weekend, and kids were fascinated that I did anything in Detroit. And then as time went on, being in Detroit sometimes became a trendy thing to be doing. So then kids were introduced to the city. But still at the border, it was always, they got in the car and went right downtown, or they got in the car and they went right to Midtown. And then that Detroit is right here from my parents' house. It's a block away. And from so many Grosse Pointers, especially in Grosse Pointe Park, Detroit is a block away or a few or right across the street. And I just felt like there's this gap that needs to be filled, where we need to just become one as communities. Why was it so crazy? It was almost like there was electric fence up when you hit Mac or Jefferson, prohibiting you from just walking a few blocks in the other direction. So in the wake of the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, I was attending marches in Detroit, and there was great energy at the marches in Detroit, and they were very necessary. And we called on DPD to do a lot of stuff. We called on City Council to do a lot of stuff. And I ended up getting really close with some of the organizers there. But I still felt like, even though they were doing suburban targeted marches in like St. Clair Shores and in Shelby Township, I still felt like the geographic area of border of Grosse Pointe and Detroit wasn't talked about enough. And it's such a spot where, racial red lines presented so clearly. So I organized the march to bring Grosse Pointers and Detroiters together, and it worked, and hundreds of people came out, and we marched the line up and down Mac in between Grosse Pointe and Detroit. But we made a list of demands, and after a few weeks' time, even city council members that attended didn't really seem to be responding to those demands. And that's kind of when Graig and Frank and I got together and started doing other community organizing efforts around the really, honestly, offensive racially motivated redlining on the Detroit border that is truly, which a lot of people don't know, it's talked about in urban planning and architecture classes all around the world as one of the most clear signs of redlining in urban planning. So, tearing down those walls, it was never a good time to build them. But if any time is a good time to take them down, it's now. And the fact that they want to build another wall at Weyburn and Mac, it's already blocked to car traffic, but they want to block pedestrian traffic and the view into Detroit. And I just think that we need to keep protesting against it, and we need to let them know that they're not safety walls. A lot of people call them safety walls instead of racially motivated borders. They're racist. It's just racist. And also just prejudice in many ways, classist. But number one thing is that it's racist. And yeah.
Well, speaking as a Detroiter, I was so offended when the border between the Alter border was established. You created a market, and it was so clearly something that was wrong. But with the DPW facility, it seems as though there are some practical values in putting it up. And the other thing is that if they are storing things behind the wall, it does seem like there could be some practical benefit to closing it off. I don't necessarily think that looking at storage or looking at a tractor will make me feel safe or make me feel included. So for me, it's hard for me to understand at times that particular fight. Can you explain to me how you think this development where you're building, something to fence something off, how is this equivalent to what happened at Alter and Kirchville?
Well, I'll speak to that because, and I'll speak as a 30+ year resident of the Cabbage Patch section of Grosse Pointe Park, which are the few blocks that are right along the border, particularly with Alter, but all the way up to Mack Avenue. And one of the, and I've been in this struggle for a long time, and one of the things that we know is true of white people in general is that sometimes they do things very overtly, and sometimes they feel for some reason or other they have to come up with an excuse that is a different rationale for what they're doing than is the real reason. So traffic has never really been the issue of these barriers, and crime has never really been the issue of these barriers. And one of the reasons that we know that is that there's way more traffic problems at the intersection of St. Paul and Cadju, which is the border between Grosse Pointe Park and Grosse Pointe City. Nobody ever proposed putting up a barrier or a fence there. They put up stop signs, for crying out loud. So all of these things are always excuses. But specifically in the case of the wall around the DPW, as a Cabbage Patch resident, why put a facility like that in a residential area in the first place? Why don't you just take the non-residential area where the current DPW is and rebuild there? It doesn't belong there in the first place. So it's another fake reason to like do the wrong thing instead of doing the right thing and being inclusive instead of exclusive and building bridges, not walls.
And
So yeah, this is a two-for wall.
That they shouldn't. Your statement is that the issue is they decided to locate the DPW facility on Mac.
Yeah.
And Mac was not the correct location for it.
Well, among other problems, right? Because there is a DPW facility right now at Jefferson and Alter, and it has basically the same square footage as the new location. If it's not adequate, then demolish what's not adequate and rebuild it there.
Now I have a question. Is that area at Mac and Alter being considered for a new art center? And does that play into the decision to relocate the DPW facility?
I'm so glad you brought that up, Donna.
Yes.
So
yeah, great
this
question.
relates a lot to the art center. The real reason that they're moving the DPW facility from its current location along Jefferson near Alter is because it's in the way of the art center development and the big sea of parking that is planned for around that new art center development. And originally, the plan was that they were going to relocate the DPW facility into Detroit, about 2 blocks to the west, to a little spot called Joe's Garage. Right. And the city of Detroit got wind that the city of Grosse Pointe Park was going to put its dirty DPW stuff well into Detroit.
Right.
Detroit put a stop to that. Rightly so. If we're going to have our maintenance and, garbage trucks and all that other stuff parked a couple blocks into Detroit, what does that say about how Grosse Pointers feel about Detroit? So the next spot up on the list was this place up on Mac, where the city of Grosse Pointe Park has bought all this land and is getting ready to clear a perfectly good building that's probably 100 years old and could be a beautiful storefront and apartment building that just sits empty now and isn't in that bad a shape. So I think the primary issue, as Frank pointed out, is that where we should have our DPW facility, where folks who would live right behind it would be subject to that right behind their houses. And that's our gateway at Detroit. So we want to welcome folks coming into our city from Detroit with a DPW facility. Is that really the best way to say, come on in, welcome?
Well, what is that what people would see though? It seems to me as though the design would be sit next to the Huntington Bank, correct?
Correct.
And most people who are driving east really do believe that Huntington Bank is in Detroit. And the other question is, does the Huntington Bank also have a wall?
There is not a wall behind the Huntington Bank, but there is a huge hole in the ground where a very sort of suburban drainage ditch has been dug for the runoff from the parking lot in the building.
Okay, all right.
Which I would say is an inverted wall in a way, actually.
Right. Okay. But the thing is, I don't think, because I think that there's issues here, and I want to really understand. If we're bringing the city together and Grosse Pointe Park together around issues of race and open up the borders, have Detroiters in adjacent neighborhoods prioritize this as their issue? And is this something that is offending Detroiters? Is there surveying being done to really evaluate Detroiters' perspectives so that we can have some of the organizations like Morningside, I think would be the nonprofit, as well as Riverbend and East English Village most impacted. Where do they weigh in on this protest?
So go ahead, Frank.
I'll just say, I think that's an excellent question. It's something we've been discussing among ourselves. The last thing we want to do is sort of replace one sort of division with another. And we strongly feel that it's incumbent on us to be more engaged with Detroiters on along both Alter and Mac in building a sense of community and exploring common interests and so on. So I appreciate that question. I think it's entirely on point. We are in contact with a lot of Detroiters organizationally and through personal networks and relationships and so on. But we do feel we should be the change, and we should lead the way in building bridges our own self. But that's not to say that it isn't also our job as Grosse Pointers to take the fight within Grosse Pointe itself to this long-standing elitist crony capitalist group that has made all these decisions and built all these barriers over many decades. That's still
there's absolutely
no matter what.
Let me tell you what I think Detroiters really care about. Some of the issues Detroiters really care about. Access to schools, okay? The Grosse Pointe made some school decisions last year. The Grosse Pointe School Board rather closed schools than even allow Detroiters to pay tuition to send their kids to Grosse Pointe schools. What a slap in the face. We won't, that's a, I'm just gonna, my issues, schools, okay? How many people are driving all the way to the other side of the world to send their children to school because Grosse Pointe is saying, we will not even let you pay to send your kids here. And by the way, quit following Black kids home from school and thinking they don't live in Grosse Pointe, because that is another issue, okay? And that's big, right? Another issue for a lot of Detroiters is parks. You got parks like country clubs, and then you say, well, the reason we can't let you in is because our country clubs are, we understand that you have parks like country clubs, but that is a manifestation of the white supremacy and the redlining that we're talking about. It really does feel to me that having a park that I can't get in, even you won't even let me buy a pass into the park. There's some ways that you can allow people to participate without saying, you know what, your tax dollars are being displaced. Maybe I can just spend, what is it? The Northwest Activity Center is free to Detroiters, and they charge a fee for non-Detroiters. Like Detroiters pay their way in, like everybody else does, right? But when you have these resources that exclude, I think those are fights that I think you're going to get a lot of Detroiters engaged in those fights. What I'm going to ask you guys to do is to work with some of us who've been at this for the past 3-4 years and trying to figure out what that border looks like along Grosse Pointe from Alter, 4 years, from Alter to Moross. And we've been in, sort of in the trenches trying to negotiate some deals. Can we work together on this? We've sat before City Council. We're working with the Grosse Pointe Board of Realtors. We have some things, and change is slow. I'm not going to say it's happening fast enough, but can we work together so that we can bring Detroit and your group in, so that we have insiders in Grosse Pointe working with us on a shared vision? Is that something that we can try to do?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
we welcome that.
Definitely.
And I think the value add to what Donna was saying gets at the question that, Frank, you were trying to answer around building coalitions with Detroiters. And I completely understand your sentiment. Like, it starts with you guys holding your city government accountable. Black folks say all the time, white people get your people, right? For those who are co-laborers in the movement. But I think the Mack Avenue improvement work and the bridge building that ECN has been doing since 2016, and the gathering, especially of those 4 neighborhoods being Riverbend, Morningside, East English Village, and even Cornerstone Village, around a shared redevelopment vision and strategy for Mack Avenue. I think that there is an opportunity to coalesce vision and have these conversations and build coalitions and actually have a way in and an ear to hear the concerns from Detroiters themselves when it comes to the behavior of the leadership in Grosse Pointe Park.
One more thing, we want Grosse Pointe Park to plant those damn trees on Mack. Rating, plant some trees, okay? We had a private investor give money to the city of Grosse Pointe to plant trees. Where are my trees? Okay, it's not like, but We were told, okay, we have to wait until we're done with our sidewalk project. Y'all fixed up that whole side and we still don't have trees.
Yeah.
And the money was allocated, and the private donor calls me up all the time saying, where are my trees? And then I call, so that's an area, let's fight for that. You owe us trees. Let's fight for investing in street lighting on Detroit side. Let's fight for putting up, you know where I'd like to see a wall? I'd like to see a wall around that DTE, what is it? The service,
that DTE site right at the morning.
the DTE site. Okay, you got a childcare right next to it. And I would just think about radiation and cancer, and I would never let my granddaughter go there just because it's there. So I think that there also are some fights. I think that in terms of that space, I haven't seen the design, right? And so I'd like to see the design and make sure that what it looks like isn't a DPW facility. You can design things, a power station things. You can design things so that they look nice. You can design it to be decorative. I want to make sure that design is in compliance and that you're sharing the design with people, not only in your community, but in the Detroit community, so that we can come together around some things. So I think that there's ways for us to collaborate and really build energy that keeps going. And Bianca, you have access to young people. And I am really trying to get that young voice involved in everything we do, because I'm pretty sure that most of those people who were marching with you were younger than me. And yeah, they were. But we really want to pull in young voices to our activities, because all too often our meetings are controlled and our agendas are set by people who are, you know, in their 50s. My granddaughter, my niece graduated from Grosse Pointe South. I want to say, oh my goodness, she just graduated from college. So 4 years ago. And, you know, and I've heard things from her. How do we get her voice? Now, she's no longer living here. She's living in California at Stanford. But how do we get voices of people like her, Black women who grew up in Grosse Pointe and feel like this is not a place where they're welcome? How do we also get young Black kids in the Grosse Pointes engaged? The racism there is so subtle, but you know it's there. You've seen it, I'm sure, firsthand. And so how do we also engage that so that we really can build a Detroit Grosse Pointe coalition?
Yeah, definitely, you know, so my march, that was one of my main goals, was to have voices of young Black people around my age, especially women, speak. So yes. I had 4 Black female speakers at my march, and some people that I went to high school, they helped me organize. And, you know, it's hard because they all, you know, like all of us work, go to school, whatever it is. And, you know, my close friend Zora Bowen, she lives in Atlanta now. So it's hard to like organize with all these people. And it's easy to lose touch, but that's not what should be happening, especially because many of the people that attended my march, as you mentioned, they were followed home from school by Grosse Pointe police. So in the case of many of my friends, they had grandparents, aunts and uncles, older siblings that lived in Detroit, and they would go to Detroit after school, and police then they were like, oh, what do we do? Do we like kick them out of the school? Like, why? And then, you know, it's like, you're not supposed to be following them home. Right. You seeing someone walk into a house in Detroit, what does that mean? That's
it's other
niceness.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely disgusting. And you know, us kind of, me and my friends from high school, talking about those experiences that they had, and deciding to kind of have that be the undertone of what we were organizing around. I think we just need to keep talking about the fact that those things are still happening. Those things that happened 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, they're still happening. There's still kids being followed home from school. There's still kids being asked if they live in Detroit, literally just because they're Black, going to Grosse Pointe schools. Yep. There's kids that are born and raised
my
in Grosse Pointe being asked that. And it really doesn't matter if they moved to Grosse Pointe yesterday. Who cares?
Yeah.
So I think we need to just take that anger and then organize around it. Unfortunately, that's the only way you can really get people going, because when you say, oh, everything's fine, but we should just kind of, no, we have to be real and honest and keep fighting for these things to stop, because it's terribly prejudiced and evil and awful, and I hate watching it happen.
Yeah, I mean, my niece and nephew graduated from Grosse Pointe South. And what I noted is that the children, other Black kids that they graduated with, almost none of them were honor students. And that's where you start getting at racial prejudice inside of schools, where students disengage and don't really pursue honors. So my niece actually was a fantastic student. She ended up going to Stanford and doing extremely well. And in doing so, she did not have any Black peers in her classes because there was such an invisible, you talk about an invisible fence. Look at what's happening inside of schooling. The kids who get moved up and the kids who get encouraged and those kids who get treated like they're not quite good enough. And, there's so much data around how this happens in suburban schools, the tracking, the invisible tracking that's racialized. And so I think there's some great conversations and great ways for us to work together. And I really do want to thank you guys for taking up a fight and for saying,
Donna, can I just add one quick thing on the point you made, because I was in another conversation this week. This conversation on the very point you made is also going on between Royal Oak Township and Ferndale.
Absolutely.
I mean, throughout all of these border communities and throughout Southeast Michigan, I do feel, and I've been doing this a long time, we are in a moment when we can have a deeper conversation than we've had so far. Anyway.
Yeah. Yes. Hey, Donna, I kind of want to go back to something you said a few minutes ago about the trees too. The folks at Eastside Community Network, yourself and Orlando included, and a bunch of others, I thought pretty successfully brought people together across the border in the last couple of years to think first about this section of MAC that goes basically from Connor to Cadieux, and now that's grown to go even further east. But in that first conversation that started a couple of years ago, there was a vision set out. And there was a sense of what people wanted to see on MAC. And it included Grosse Pointe Park helping on the Detroit side, which has not happened. And it also included a notion about a site like this right at the Detroit border being a place that should be walkable, that should be with the kind of spot where people might want to stop and have a bite to eat or something. If it's just a bunch of DPW trucks in a garage there, it can't be that. But if that is the best spot for the DPW, you also don't have to keep a road closed, and you don't have to put a wall across that road. So I feel like Grosse Pointe Park, and in particularly administration, needs to catch up to what our neighbors are doing on the other side and join the conversation that they've been getting welcomed into for a long time. Like we're ready to talk with our administration about it. They just don't want to return the favor.
Well, so I think that in terms of walkability, like I said, I haven't seen a site plan. I know that we looked at creating, seating in front of restaurants, and I don't think that this will impede that happening. And certainly, I hope it does not impede the walkability along MAC. What it does impede is access to Grosse Pointe Park on Weyburn, and I don't know that that was ever envisioned in the plan to increase access from MAC. So I do want to make that distinction. I think that if we can tear down walls, we should. If the wall or whatever it is has a functional purpose, then I think they should explain it to us so that we can get a good understanding. And if indeed you do it, then it should be beautiful and contribute to the overall aesthetics of the area. In terms of the street trees, you are absolutely right that there were some things that were committed that were not done. And we need to hold people accountable for doing the things that they say they were going to do, and not backing away. I know that there was a change in representation on our committee. And I think that right now, one of the things that you've been able to do is encourage Nick Seisland to actually join our strategy committee so he can sit at the table and we can make demands right at a table with him and with other people who have influence over a process. And the other thing is that, that's where the Growth Corp is going to be. That's where DTE is going to be. That's where Wayne County is going to be, and where I forget who else is at the table. What'd you say?
SimCog.
SimCog, yes, that's what I was thinking. SimCog is at that table. And so what we're trying to do is utilize a committee process to really raise some really challenging questions and say, why don't you bring this here? Let's take a look at it here so that this committee has an opportunity to evaluate and hear. And we just got done doing a public comment section for not the Grosse Pointe Park, but from Grosse Pointe to Ross. And what we found is that there is a tremendous opportunity to create a public commentary using Zoom and other media. We actually got more participation in Zoom processes than we would if we had brought people to meetings. So I think there's an opportunity for us to bring some of these things back to the drawing board and to try to make sure that we're getting some feedback from people. And then, you know, as with every development, there's a community benefits aspect of it. If you're going to do this, what will you do to replace it? What will you do to address community benefit? If they're dead set on doing it, let's leverage a concession on something else that is of interest to us. So,
and I think that's important. And I think absent that DPW site plan, I think there's an opportunity for everybody to come together and hold up those plans up against the amazing work that has been going on in partnership with ECN, the Grosse Pointes, the county, and SEMCOG. That particular site in the Mac Avenue Improvement Plan, I remember vividly, is supposed to be a pedestrian-oriented site. It calls for that. It calls for the redevelopment of that building. And so it would be interesting to see the new DPW site plan up against what committee stakeholders and residents said and agreed upon what they wanted back when we finished the plan the first phase 1 plan in 2017. So this there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of conversation to be had. And so I am warmed in my heart that you all are having this conversation, that you're pushing for equity in the Grosse Pointes, and that another equity pusher that is Eastside Community Network, and you guys can sort of join in conversation and figure out how to move forward together.
Yes.
Stronger together, right?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, well, I have one more thing to say that, you know, I just feel like in order for us to move forward with these efforts of bridging our communities, I think it's on the municipalities of the Grosse Pointes and change makers in the Grosse Pointes and teachers and police and all these entities to admit their racism and acknowledge it and apologize for it and move past it. Because, you know, you hear people calling the borders safety walls, or people not really talking about these kids getting followed home from police, the discrimination they face within the school, you know, the parks kind of being racist with the way that they have us use the park passes and all that. So I think there needs to be a huge wave of acknowledgement and apology when it comes to prejudices like racism for us to actually move forward. Because if we pretend like, oh, actually we're just taking these down because we don't need a traffic circle anymore and it was no reason, or we're just doing this because we said so, or whatever, or like, no, we need to acknowledge it. And I think for sure the police need to acknowledge that they followed these kids home from school. There's not enough writing on it. There's not enough acknowledgement of it. And just like, yeah, all the bureaucracies and everyone around, all these businesses that do racially motivated things, there's a lot of accountability to be had. And without that happening, we can't move forward to bridge our communities, because it's like pretending like trickle down economics is real, or like, you know, Black people weren't slighted in things like tax foreclosures and things like. If we just pretend like none of that happened, it's not really moving forward. So we really need a lot of accountability before we can truly unite as two different communities, as two different neighborhoods.
Well, and I think the reality is that there's an economic impact to the Grosse Pointes as things happen. As it is, you had to close 2 schools last year because of declining enrollment. I think that young people are leaving Grosse Pointes and not necessarily going to stay. And so the attractiveness of that area to retain certain families is not there. I think that the communities are diversifying with or without their consent. And so I think that there are learning opportunities in the process. I think that I'm much more interested in policy responses than apologies. I don't trust apologies. When people say we're sorry, I don't believe that. When people say, oh, I don't believe whatever, all those apologies every corporation and everybody made after George Floyd was killed made me sick. okay? As if he's the first Black man who got killed on camera in the past however long. Every single time these people die, juries acquit them. So I'm more interested in action than words. What kind of policies can we get them to commit to? What kind of changes can we get them to commit to that will reverse racist past? And that could mean everything from a school policy that stops penalizing people for being Black and suspicious inside of a white school district as they see it, or school policies that stop having racially biased decision making about who belongs in honors classes, and also racist treatment by teachers so that some students don't feel valued. And that's a big part of what happens in education. So when we get to those things, I think that we can see some change, and figuring out what those demands are going to be. You have all of these parks. Grosse Pointe Park has 2 parks. Desegregate one of them, okay? You don't have to give us both. Just let us in one. You know, it's a matter of put your money where your mouth is. Don't tell me you love me, because we actually got a really cool statement that we got people to commit to, but show me as relates to that.
No, I definitely think apologies should come with accountability, and have an accountability process of exactly, don't just say it, but show everyone. So yeah, not just definitely not just some half-ass apology is not what we need. It would be great, but yeah, and a whole accountability process around all of these injustices and all of these terrible things and all these facets.
So I really want to thank I want to thank you for joining us. I think we're going to have to wrap up a great conversation, but hopefully it's not the end of our conversation, but the beginning of us working together around a new vision for the border and for what happens inside of the Grosse Pointes and inside Detroit to promote unity and change policy and conditions. So with that,
if you have topics that you want discussed on Authentically Detroit, you can hit us up on our socials at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Authentically Detroit, or email us at authenticallydetroit@gmail.com. It's time to wrap it up. Donna, you have any shout outs this week?
Well, before I shout out, I do want to point out that next week we're going to a whole new format. So next week, Authentically Detroit is going to be a live stream webinar. We're inviting the community into our conversations. We've decided if we could do it for the Detroit Podcast Festival, we can do it, period. So plan on joining us next week. I don't think it's going to be this time. We're going to have to work out the date because I have conflicts next Tuesday. But plan on joining us next week. Sorry, Orlando, that you're learning about it here. But I actually have 2 conflicts because I tend to triple book. Plan on joining us next Tuesday so that we can engage you, and you can raise your questions right then. And if you have really good questions and we have time, we might even be able to bring you in and let you ask your questions directly. We'll see how the format goes.
Yeah, that's going to be fun.
I want to shout out to every single person who has contributed to the extravaganza. We have 80 separate people who've contributed. The first money in was Mr. Graig Donnelly. So I really have to shout out Graig for being the first money in. And a lot more has come our way. Anybody who gave, anybody who plans on giving, please join us. I want to shout out Valencia Stoudemire, the wife of the late Marlo Stoudemire. I can't even bring my mouth to say the other word, but the wife of the late Marlo Stoudemire, who has what a strong woman, what an amazing person, what a beautiful family. It breaks my heart. And so she is going to assist us in honoring her late husband, and to the kids, the entire Stoudemire family, his mother, his siblings. Every time I think about his unnecessary death, I think about Donald Trump and can't wait to vote next Tuesday, the Tuesday after next, because it truly, that's when it became personal. So I want to shout her out. I want to shout out Representative Rashida Tlaib, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, and Dr. Abdul El Sayed for joining Orlando and myself in a podcast festival on Sunday. That's what we do on our Sunday evenings. We talk. And I also want to shout out Dr. El Sayed for being our this year Truth to Power Award winner. I'd like to shout out to Anna Dillahunt for being our innovation partner. I can't remember that, but she has won a prize for being such an innovator, as well as
Arlene.
Cindy.
Cindy
Mhm.
Eggleston. Outstanding partner.
Cindy Eggleston, brilliant Detroit, for being a great partner. We're going to honor all those people and more on Thursday. So please join us at the Eastside Extravaganza. Coming is free. We're going to ask you some money for money once you get there, and we're going to have some great entertainment and auction items.
Yes, so go to ecn-detroit.org to RSVP for your spot today. The Eastside Extravaganza will also be live streaming on Facebook from 6 to 8-ish. It's gonna go a little bit over 8 o'clock with a dope after party. So you don't wanna check that out. It's still gonna be the best party on the East Side, even though it is digitized. And for next week's live show, we are excited to welcome Anika Goss of Detroit Future City to talk about the economic equity framework that Detroit Future City released last week, along with some other surprise guests. So make sure you register to be on live on Zoom with us next week for a live taping of Authentically Detroit. With that, thank you all so much once again.
It was great.
Shout out to all of you, Frank, Graig.
Yes, thank you.
It was a great time, great conversation, and we know that this is only the beginning. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We want you to catch the wave.